Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I was trying to figure out why we were here today. I was trying to think through the history of this issue. And not long ago, during a discussion on this issue, I was reminded that the only reason we were going to be dealing with transgendered kids during the legislative session was it was Obama's fault. If only President Obama had not issued regulations related to transgender youth in federal overreach, we wouldn't have had to act in the Texas legislature. Well, lo and behold, President Trump wipes out those federal regulations, takes them all the way off the books, yet we're still here. You wonder why? Because that was the pretext, right? It was federal overreach against the state. Yet now we stand here as the state seeking to do the same thing to the school districts that, as even the amendment author said, are soldiering on just fine. Because school districts are supposed to protect their students. And in fact, they do a really good job throughout the state. Because these transgender students and the accommodations they need don't need an amendment on a bill to be enacted. They're happening each and every day in the state of Texas, with or without our action. And we were told how important this amendment was, members. This amendment had to pass. If this amendment was so important, why wasn't it a standalone bill to protect the kid with the colostomy bag or to protect all students? We know this is not what it's about, members. We wouldn't be here on a Sunday trying to contort an amendment to fit on this bill and move the rules so that we get a vote. That's what's happening today. And when you talk about bringing the full weight of the state government down upon trans kids, that is a hurricane. That is an earthquake. That is a disaster for these kids. And the people who have spoken before me have spoken about why. The high incidence of suicide among trans youth. In fact, before this session, I sat with the parent of a trans child. In fact, a child who, when she was younger, used to babysit my kids. And she told me, "You better fight for my child. I need you to fight for my child, because if the full weight of the state government comes down on my child, I am scared. And I would much rather have a live son than a dead daughter." And that's what's at stake today here, members. When the Human Rights Campaign does a study in 2016 on trans Americans, they call it a matter of life and death. And they chronicle at least the 21 transgender people that have been murdered across the United States. In fact, as we've been debating this issue in 2017, members, there have already been 10 transgender people fatally shot or killed by other violent means in the United States. Mesha Caldwell, a black transgender woman from Canton, Mississippi. Jamie Lee Wounded Arrow, a Native American woman who was identified as transgendered and was found dead in her apartment in Sioux Falls. JoJo Stryker, a transgender woman found killed in Toledo, Ohio. Tiara Richmond was fatally shot in Chicago on the morning of February 21st. China Dupree, a black transgender woman, was shot and killed in New Orleans on February 25th. Shiara McElveen, a transgender woman of color, was stabbed to death in New Orleans the next day, on February 27th. Jacarius Holland, 18, was shot to death in Monroe, Louisiana on February 19th. Alfonso Watson, 38, was shot and killed in Baltimore, Maryland. Che Reed, a transgender woman of color, was shot and killed on April 21st in Miami. Kenneth Bostic, 59, was found with severe injuries on a Manhattan sidewalk and later died of his injuries. So it is a hurricane. It is an earthquake. It is a natural disaster. But the perpetrators aren't transgendered people. The victims are transgendered people. And instead of sitting here and pretending this is about something else, I owe it to the parents of transgender children in the district I represent, and I owe it to my transgendered constituents to call it what it is. And I owe it to all of those transgender people who are murdered, who are bullied, who are marginalized, who are discriminated against at work, who have to hide. I owe it to them. I want to affirm them. I want to affirm them on this House floor in the people's house. I want to look up at the gallery at all the transgendered Texans, be they kids or not, and tell you, you are affirmed. You should not live in fear. And there are people here in this house who will defend you. You are affirmed. It is beneath this house to have to contort itself in this way. For I think nothing more than politics. I'm sure that when any of you ran for office, I can only ascribe to you completely honest and pure motivations about making this state better, about protecting people, about helping people, about identifying need in your communities that you wanted to ask your friends and neighbors to send you down here to solve. Just ask that you think about whether or not you're doing that today. And think about the people who need you today. Thank you, members.